All right, welcome to this conversation. We're going to talk about why your ex-wife, can act like she's fine during divorce. I'm having a few tech issues this morning, you guys, so I'm just going to pop this link over to the other live stream that I had set up so that folks can join us. Okay, please join me here. Okay. All right, so thank you for bearing with me. I am sorry for any confusion here. We're trying some new streaming software, and it's not my favorite. So for our next live stream, we'll have it all ironed out. All right, so as folks are coming on, today we're talking about what happens when your wife just acts like she's okay, right? This divorce is tearing you up inside. You're experiencing all of the horrible emotions, and she just seems kind of okay. And when I see men having this experience, it's really, really painful for them, because it makes it feel like they never mattered, like the marriage didn't matter to her. So in today's video, what we're going to cover is what this is really about. When she acts like she's fine, sometimes it's because she actually is. Other times it's because she's pretending to be. So I'm going to tell you what both of those things actually mean, because they don't mean what you're afraid of. Even if she is fine, it is not because she never cared about you or this marriage meant nothing to her. So I'm going to tell you what that really means. We're going to look at how to tell the difference. Is she truly fine, or is she just acting fine? And then we're also going to talk about what you can do to move forward so that you can get through this divorce in a healthy way. And also so that if there is a chance of reconciliation, if that's something that you want, that you can maximize that opportunity. So as we're getting started, guys, please say hi to me in the chat. Let me know that you can hear me. Tell me what brought you here, what you want to take out of this conversation. I'd love to hear from you. There's a lot that we can cover today. There's some things that I have in mind, obviously, to talk about, but I'd love to adapt this and make it really work for you, so that you can take away what you need to today. Oh, good. Hi, Monty. Hi, Sean. I'm glad you guys made it over from the other live. I'm really sorry for the delay and the tech issues today. Hi, guys. Hi from Georgia. Hi from the UK. Oh, awesome. Hi, Chris. Hi, John. Good to have everybody on. Okay, guys. So I'm gonna jump right into this. We're gonna talk about why women look and act fine. But as I'm starting to discuss this, I'd love to hear from you. Is this something that you've experienced? Has your soon-to-be ex-wife or ex-wife done this thing where she just seems like everything's fine and she puts on this great face? I've even heard some men say that it's almost like she's like living her best life while you're going through this incredible pain. So if you want to share any details with me in the chat, please do. I see from David, absolutely. From Monty, excessively so. Yeah, that can be actually a sign that she's not okay, Monty. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, so tell me in the chat what you've seen in your wife or your ex-wife, and also what you want to take away from this call today. Okay, guys, so when we started, I said that if she's acting like she's fine, it usually means one of two things. Either she is fine, and that's why she's acting that way, or she's not fine and she's pretending to be. Okay? And so when I want to be really clear, when I say that she might actually be fine, for a lot of people, that's like a knife in the chest, right? Because you're not fine. And you're not fine because this marriage mattered to you, because she mattered to you. The life that you were building together mattered. So it feels like if she can just end that and walk away and be happy, like, then this must have never mattered to her. And you can start to question, who is this woman? Do I even know her? Did I ever know her? And it can make it, I hear men use this language is so painful, but they use the language, I feel like a piece of trash that she just threw away. Even if she really is fine now, it is not because she's throwing this marriage away like a piece of garbage, or you like a piece of garbage. If she truly is okay, and that's why she's acting this way, it's because she's already gone through all of the intense and disruptive emotions of divorce. So, mostly I work in my coaching program with men who are going through unwanted divorces, but I talk to a lot of men who do initiate the divorce as well. And I can tell you this, it doesn't matter if you're initiating it or not. No one goes through the divorce process without experiencing a lot of difficult emotions. There's guilt, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's regret, there's grief. And so even if she is at a point now where she is genuinely okay, she's gone through all of that. And sometimes the reason that a woman seems fine after divorce is because she's been going through all of those emotions around making this decision. And once the decision is actually made and it's in progress, there's a sense of relief from all of that inner turmoil. So sometimes she acts fine because she's already gone through all of that grieving process. And often, this is maybe a topic for another conversation, but often there's a case where the woman is going through that process before you know that there's a problem. And there's a lot of different reasons for this that we can get into. Some of it is poor communication on her part. Some of it is an emotional disconnect that a lot of men have been really conditioned to live in, so they don't notice that she's going through all of this. So there can be a lot of different reasons, but there's often a timeline discrepancy where for you it's new. It's like, oh my gosh, this divorce is happening. What are you talking about? It's like you just got hit by a train and you're trying to figure out what this means and deal with all of the emotions. Whereas for her, she's been going through all those emotions for years now and has actually processed a lot of it. And now it can even feel like a sense of relief to be like, okay, that part's done. All of that emotion and that grieving is over. And now we're just going through the actual actions. So sometimes that's what's going on. A lot of times that's not it. A lot of times she's acting like she's fine and she's really, truly not fine. We talk a lot about how men are conditioned to suppress emotions, but women can be very good at masking emotions. And so where young men get a lot of conditioning to be tough, to be strong, to not show weakness, and so they learn to suppress what they feel or to hide what they feel. What women tend to be conditioned into as young girls, what we tend to learn is that we're supposed to keep the peace, that we're supposed to make people happy and not disrupt too much with what we feel. And so often a woman will pretend and be very good at pretending that she's okay. And I'd love to check with you guys in the chat. I'm going to get back to some of these comments. Thank you guys for sharing what's been going on with your wives. We're going to look at this and talk about it. But I want to ask you a quick question first. Does anybody on this call have a wife or an ex-wife who during the marriage, you often didn't know how she felt? And this might be that, maybe there was an argument or there was something going on and you were often surprised to find out how she really felt about it. Okay, I see lots of yeses. All right, so she wouldn't talk about it. Yeah. So if in the marriage you didn't know she was unhappy, and let me ask this a different way. How many people on this call were blindsided by the divorce? You didn't think it was coming. Like you thought maybe you knew there were some problems, but you thought they were fixable or that things were okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Absolutely. Me. Yes. Okay. If you were blindsided by the divorce, or if you didn't know how your wife was feeling during the marriage, that's in part because she's good at hiding what she feels, right? Which means that if you thought she was fine during the marriage, you thought the marriage was fine, and then all of a sudden she asked for divorce, and now you're looking at her and she seems fine, and you're like, how can she be so fine and happy? It's the same thing, right? Just like she masked it and didn't communicate those emotions then, she may very well be masking it now, right? Sunday Coffee says, I think all of us are here because we couldn't read our wife. Yeah, and again, maybe this is our next live conversation. There's a lot of different elements at play. Right? That lack of reading can be in part her lack of communication, but it's also a combination. It's usually she's not communicating, but there's also certain emotional signals or signs that you're missing because, again, of that conditioning to really suppress your own emotions. All right, so we've got two options, right? Either she actually is fine because she's already gone through a lot of this grieving process, and now moving into the divorce is a sense of relief for her. It's a step of closure and moving away from the grieving process, even though you're at a very different point, right? You're just starting the grieving process. Or she's really not fine and she's still dealing with all of those emotions and she's trying to pretend she's fine, partly because that's her habit, right? That's how she's coped throughout the marriage, even though it caused a lot of problems. And it can also be out of shame. Shame causes us to hide. She's making a decision that's incredibly disruptive to you, to her. If you have children, she knows it's disruptive to them. Right? This is a huge decision. And she may feel shame around it. And so acting like she's fine, acting like this is a really good choice for her, that might be part of, subconsciously, how she is really justifying to herself and to the people around her that she's doing the right thing, that this is the right choice. Divorce is complicated. There's a lot of pain. And I can tell you this, no one is going through it just skipping along through the daisies really, truly fine. She's having an emotional experience, or she has been through an emotional experience before this point, even if you haven't been able to see it or if she hasn't shared it with you. All right, guys, so let's talk a little bit about what it really means, either whether she's acting or she really is fine. Because a lot of the men I talk to feel like her being fine, again, it's like this personal attack. It's like this didn't mean anything to her. Has that been anybody's experience, that when she acts fine, it's really triggering for you? Okay, sorry, I'm going to catch up here in the chat in just a minute. Monty says, yes, that's me. She hit it really well. Very true. Okay. Yeah, so David says it hurts pretty bad. Mixed emotions from my wife. Yes, it was triggering, so I started ignoring her, and that annoys her. I bet it does. Hi, Reggie. Nice to have you on from Oahu. Okay. So, guys, maybe the most important takeaway from this call, if you don't hear anything else or take anything else forward, is that what she's doing, how she's acting, it is not a reflection of you. It's not a reflection of who you are as a man, who you were as a husband, how much this marriage or this relationship mattered. Her behavior, her words right now today, they are a reflection of her current nervous system state, and how she is coping with her emotions. And if you look back through your marriage, you're probably going to pick up some patterns of how she's coped. And just because it's, coping can be effective and really toxic at the same time. So what she's doing, and I want to encourage all of you, especially if you have to see her, if you're cohabitating, if you're co-parenting, if you have interactions with her, when you see her and she says something or does something and you feel that jab, that pain, your job is to take a big, deep breath and remind yourself, this is not about me. What she's saying, what she's doing, this is a reflection of what's happening inside of her. It's how she's coping with what she's feeling. It is not about me. Okay, guys, I want to catch up with you in the chat. So as I'm looking back through, would you guys also just drop me a note here? How are we doing? Is any of this resonating with you? Is any of it bringing up questions or not sticking for you? Is there something where you're like, no, Rachel, it's really not my experience? Drop it in the chat, and we're going to take the rest of this call and really focus on what you need to take away from this. Okay, so, and I know there's a lot here in the chat, you guys, so I'm going to try to catch up a little bit here. Norman says, if you can manage a no contact environment, then how she is reacting is more manageable. If she filed, she has the ownership and the consequences. So Norman, there's a lot just in that comment. Yes, no contact can be more manageable. Sometimes it's not possible, especially when there's younger kids involved. But I do see, and for those of you who are cohabitating and still sharing a home, I would encourage you create as much space for yourself as you can, because less interaction with her is less triggering moments. And we can manage these kinds of triggers. We need to manage them in two different ways. We want to get to the root of what's really being triggered in you so you can unearth it and break that cycle and heal it, so that you can get to the point where you can stand in a room with her and not be triggered, where she doesn't have that power to cause that pain and reaction in you. Ultimately, that's what we want to do. But in the meantime, we also need to manage those triggers, right? And that's what no contact can do. It can give you some space from all of that constant triggering interaction while you deal with the underlying pain. Norman said something else, though, that I just want to talk about briefly. He said, if she filed, she has the ownership and the consequences. I see men getting really stuck here, because sometimes she asks for divorce, but then she doesn't file. I don't know if has that been true for anybody on this call? Guys, I have seen men who are like 2 years out. She asked for divorce. They've separated. She's dating somebody new, but she hasn't filed. And that limbo can be excruciating, because what do? right? You want to move forward, but maybe you don't feel like you fully can, or you're trying to start dating and people are like, well, why are you still married, right? If you're getting divorced, why hasn't the divorce happened? And so what Norman had just commented on, that if she files, she has the ownership and the consequences. A lot of people hold that belief and then they get stuck because she doesn't file. And now you're really in this victim mode. So I would encourage you, this isn't going to be the case for everybody, but that is a belief that you might want to look at and shift if she's not filing. Because I don't want you to get stuck in that limbo for years. The filing is just the filing. It is not who files for divorce, how it actually ends in the paperwork and in the courts. That is not ultimately where the blame or the fault is in this divorce and in this marriage, right? The marriage ended because of patterns in both of you, because of cycles that you both carried with you throughout your lives that caused issues in communication and connection, that created conflict, that escalated. There's attachment patterns that you're both carrying. There's past traumas. There's codependency. There's all kinds of things that you both brought into this relationship. And that's ultimately where the divorce came from. I would encourage you not to worry too much about who filed. Okay, sorry to go totally off on a tangent here. I see some more folks jumping into the chat when I had asked where you're at. David says, she said she lost herself in the marriage and that she finally feels like herself again. Really, all she feels is the high of a new relationship, and she doesn't seem to realize it won't last. So, David, I can't know because I don't know her and I know nothing about your situation here. But I will tell you there's a couple of possibilities going on. It is very common that somebody files for divorce, jumps into a new relationship. It feels, all this new relationship feelings, feels amazing, and it distracts them from doing work on themselves. It is also possible if somebody, this is men and women both, this isn't about her, this is an option for you as well. If you go through this divorce and you really look at yourself and you say, okay, how did we get here? How did this happen? What's my part in it? What's her part in it? What did we both bring in? And you go in and you identify. Divorce is the result of these, I'm going to use the word toxic, even though it's really not my favorite, maybe ineffective cycles. Right? As children, we all learn how to give and receive love. Sometimes we learn that in very unhealthy ways. We learn how to respond to conflict. We learn about commitment. Right? And those lessons that we learn about relationships and about ourselves, they're not always true, right? If we have parents who deal with conflict by yelling or by withdrawing and shutting down, if love and attention only come when we're getting in trouble, or if there's abuse and we're being hurt by the same people who love us, we can learn all kinds of messed up things, right? And this is where those different attachment styles come in, all the insecure attachment, the anxious attachment, the avoidant attachment. This is where we learn codependent patterns. If we don't learn how to validate or feel secure in ourselves as children, or feel our own worth, if we're never taught that, then we seek that from other people. And now we've got these cycles of seeking validation in different ways. Right? So there's all of these patterns, usually rooted quite early in our childhood, that we're both coming into a marriage with. And then in the marriage, we're both trying to just live out those patterns, and often they're clashing and even escalating fear, insecurity, and pain in each other. So we come in with all of these cycles that prevent us from having what we really want, which is deep, genuine connection and security. Okay? So divorce is an opportunity to break those cycles, to recognize them, identify them, and heal them in yourself. If you do that, then you can, and I'm going to frame this for men more than for her, but David, this is another possibility for her as well. When I see men doing that, they get to a point where they say, look, like, this divorce was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. But in a way, I'm glad that it happened because I was never able to recognize or break these patterns before. And so now I have this knowledge of who I am. I have this superpower in relationships where I can see through the conflicts, see through the bullshit, and connect with people. It makes life safer, richer, relationships better. So if you take this divorce and you create that opportunity for yourself, then you actually might move out the other side and feel more like yourself than you have in years. Right? So it is possible. This honestly does not happen very often. I wish it happened more for everyone's sake. It is possible for a woman to file for divorce and do that work on herself and come out the other side and say, yeah, I've identified these patterns and I've broken them, and I finally do feel like myself again in a way that I couldn't in the marriage when we were both stuck in those cycles. David, it sounds like what she's doing is probably not that, right? She's jumped into this new relationship and is high on all of that excitement and kind of living out the early stages of those cycles. But I do want to bring that up as a possibility. Sometimes, in some cases, she's acting fine because she really has done the work. If you want to know the difference or how to tell the difference, is she really fine or not? There's a pretty simple way. If she's really, truly fine, you're going to see her healthy self. Be nice. She's going to be friendly. She's going to be compassionate. And to have a balanced perspective and a balanced memory of the past and the future. If you're seeing her survival self, which is the part that's defensive, that's angry, that's selfish, that's fearful, that's anxious, all of that coming out, that's a sign that she's acting fine, but isn't truly fine. Okay. Sorry, guys, I'm totally getting behind you in the chats, and I see a lot of good stuff coming up here that I want to make sure I answer. As we're going, please drop your questions in the chat. Also, for those of you who are here on my YouTube audience, I have a new campaign that we are just starting right now, and I'm really excited to announce it today. I'll talk more about it at the end of this call. It's called the Break the Cycle campaign. It's about identifying and breaking these cycles that lead to divorce so that you can have genuinely healthy, happy relationships going forward, not just romantic relationships, but better relationships with your kids, better relationships with friends and family. So this Break the Cycle campaign, we're going to be starting it on Instagram. So to join it, you can DM me on Instagram. My handle is @RachaelSloanCoach. And so on Instagram, you can DM me and tell me some of your story. Tell me where you're at. And I will ask some questions. I'll be on there. My team will be on there. We're going to ask you some questions and help you figure out what are the cycles that you need to address and what is the next step for you in really healing from this divorce, identifying and breaking those cycles and moving forward. So I'm really excited about this new campaign. You can DM me on Instagram @RachaelSloanCoach, share some of your story, and I will be able to give you a little more personal advice and guidance on what the next step needs to be for you. I know I also have a lot of folks here from my community, from BBD. So guys, we're going to use this campaign a little bit differently inside the program, but we're also going to be really talking and focusing about identifying and breaking these cycles. And I'll give you guys some additional tools this week to do that inside of BBD. Okay, so we'll talk more about that campaign at the end. Okay, I've seen Major Sam here says she wanted to file as a co-petitioner, and then my attorney said it didn't matter who files. So I ended up filing even though I didn't want the divorce. Yeah, Major Sam, thank you for sharing that. This is because that filing, it can be like this boogeyman in your head, and it's part of the brain trying to say who's at fault here, right? Who's responsible for this? Who has to carry the weight of these consequences? But ultimately, if we're really honest with ourselves, we had a part to play, and so did she. And we can start to identify what that part was. And the filing, it's the meaning you put on it that carries forward. It doesn't actually have any objective meaning. It's how are you thinking about your role in this? Sean says, I'm at the point where I'm ready to move on, but wanting to give her the option to reconcile. But that I've told her is her choice. Yeah, Sean, that can be a tricky situation to be in. I'm curious for you, would you drop me a note down in the chat, Sean, if you're still on? When you say you're ready to move on, what does that mean for you? What would moving on successfully look like for you? Okay. Wow, guys, I love so much participation in the chat. I'm sorry that I'm not keeping up so well here. I see some more comments here from Norman. Yes, I agree with you. Norman says no contact means the neural pathways deteriorate over time. Reestablishing contact makes these neural pathways fire off again. Absolutely. Yes, that's so spot on, Norman. And then our role, part of our job, right, is to identify those neural pathways and then intentionally unwire and rewire other ones so that then that contact doesn't have so much power to re-trigger them. Those neural pathways that get triggered, they're almost like highways in the brain, right? And the less we use it, the more overgrown it gets. And we can actually create new pathways so that when you do reestablish contact, your brain has another path to go down, not just reigniting those old pathways. So yeah, we could go on a total deep dive about the rewiring some of these triggers. Okay, Sean, I had asked you that question. He said, I'm happy for her to come back, but equally okay if she wants to move on outside of our marriage. Sean, that's being in a state where you know you're going to be okay regardless of the outcome. That's where healing really lives. There's a lot to celebrate there. He says, I feel we could develop a much better relationship after our separation, but it's her decision. Yeah, and Sean, for those of you who, I know most of the men I work with, and I would imagine most of you here on this call have this experience too. A part of you usually wants to reconcile. Right? Most of the men I work with, even if they know they need to move on, they'll be like, yeah, but a part of me is hoping she'll pick up the phone, she'll call, she'll come back. And I love what Sean is saying here, right? He says, I feel we could develop a much better relationship after our separation, but it's her decision. You absolutely could develop a much better relationship after your separation, right? Because of the work that you've done, right? Sean has identified a lot of these cycles. He's broken a lot of the old patterns. So now this relationship would be a very, very different thing. The way that they communicate would be different. The way they express love would be different. The way they approach conflict would be different from his side. Right? But if she's not willing to identify and break her own patterns, if she's not interested in doing that work on herself and within the relationship, then that relationship really can't move forward. It's almost like when you do this cycle breaking work, it's like, you've been dancing with your partner for all of these years, and you guys have been dancing the same dance, taking the same steps again and again and again. And now all of a sudden, like, you were doing the waltz and you change and you start dancing the salsa, right? And she can either shift with you, right, and learn the steps. And maybe you guys aren't that good at it at first, but eventually you keep practicing and now you're dancing the salsa, or she keeps dancing the waltz. And if you're dancing the salsa and she keeps dancing the waltz, eventually that relationship, it's not going to work, right? It's going to start to fall apart for both of you. Yes, Sean says she has to take that step. And then it's up to Sean, right, to decide how much time he's kind of willing to be available for her to take that step. And what I see for a lot of people is that, they reach a point where they say, okay, I'm really not willing to take her back unless she does this work. And they reach a point where they say, it's time for me to get out of this limbo and start moving on. So that's a very personal decision. But Sean, there's a lot to celebrate in being at the point where you can see that you're going to be healthy and happy either way, and then creating some space for her to decide if she wants to meet you there or not. Chris says, Norman, I have to be in contact, but I'm trying to use the sound of her voice to remind me how annoying she got to create a new pathway of how nice it is to be away from her. That's an interesting strategy, Chris. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So sometimes there's a lot of different options for redirecting that path. Chris, drop me a note in the chat. Do you want to talk more about how that's working for you and if there's more effective strategies? Or if you don't want to, we don't have to continue that conversation. You might have just been replying to Chris or replying to Norman. But let me know if you want to talk about that, because we could go down a little rabbit hole on that too. He says, sure. Yeah, so Chris, when you do that, how is it working for you? When you're trying to, like, you see her, you have an initial trigger and then you say, yes, but it's nice to be away from her. Remember how annoying she got in this relationship. It helps. Okay. And how do you feel, Chris, when you do that? What's your emotional state? I have to remember that we were not happy. Okay. Yeah. I see some other comments coming on Sunday Coffee. Says, when I hear her voice, it sounds like Darth Vader now. David says, Chris, that's a great idea. Sometimes when I'm missing her, I'm missing an idealized version of her from years ago. I need to remind myself of the person she became in the last year. And Chris said he feels empowered when he thinks this way. Okay. So yes. So Chris, it sounds like this tool is working well for you. There's a technique that I often teach my clients called yes and, which is when the brain says something like, oh my gosh, there she is, I miss her so much. You say yes and remember how things really weren't good and we weren't happy in the end. And you can shift the focus of that thought. And if you do it frequently enough, you can actually link the two up so that as soon as the brain has the initial thought, like, oh my gosh, I miss her so much, it automatically triggers the follow-up thought of, yes, but we weren't happy, and can bring up that empowered feeling. And Chris is going deeper with this, right? He's saying, I don't actually miss her, right? I miss my identity, the identity I had as a husband and father within that marriage. And so that's part of what he's reminding himself is I don't actually miss this relationship. I miss the person I was, the role that I played when I was in that relationship. I want to offer a little caution. Chris, it doesn't sound like you're at risk of this right now. But depending on where other folks are on this call, and especially when Sunday Coffee says she sounds like Darth Vader, there is a risk of doing the opposite of idealizing her, right? You can idealize her and you can villainize her. We want to avoid doing both. We want to humanize her. She's just a person. She's just a woman. She's just a human being with a human brain that's got all of these past cycles and patterns and neural pathways, and she probably doesn't really know how to manage it or work with it or break those cycles. Right? Ultimately, that's all she is. She's just a person with a human brain she doesn't know how to manage. Because there's a risk if we try to stop idealizing somebody by villainizing them, it's just like two sides of the same coin. We're still giving them a lot of power. Right? When you idealize her, she's like, oh my gosh, she's amazing. And it has to be her. And I can't be happy with anyone else. And she has to validate who I am. And right? We're giving her so much power over who I am and what kind of person I am and my own self-worth. But if I make her into this monster and she's, sorry to pick on you, Sunday Coffee, the Darth Vader though, like she's Darth Vader, right? She's this ultimate bad guy. She's this evil thing. Now she has a lot of power too, right? And at the end of the day, she's really just a person. Major Sam says there are things about her that I miss and things about her I don't miss. Yes, very true. David says, I miss being a family and seeing my kids every day more than I miss her specifically at this point. Okay, guys, so I have about 8 minutes left that I can be on the call. Where do you want to go? What questions do you have for me? What would you like to talk about for the last few minutes of this live session? I'm going to give you guys a moment to drop any questions you have in the chat. And just a reminder, we can continue this conversation on Instagram with my Break the Cycle campaign. So to join me in that, come over to Instagram. My handle's at Rachael Sloan Coach, and you can just send me a message, share some of your story, and I will help you figure out what the next step would be best for you in your situation. And I know some of you might not be on Instagram. I know I wasn't at all until very recently. So if you're not on Instagram, but you still want to pick my brain or get a little more personal guidance, you can also fill out the contact form on my website. That's rachelsloancoaching.com. Fill out the contact form and my team will make sure that it gets to me and that we can give you a little personalized support. Okay, so I see some questions coming in. What techniques do I use myself? Sunday Coffee, when you say that, would you be a little more specific? What techniques do I use myself for, like rewiring my own thoughts or managing my own emotions, or more specifically, like in my own marriage? There's a lot of them, and I'll be happy to tell you a little bit of what my routine is. You say, yep. Okay, all of those things. Both. Okay, so let's see. I use a combination. I do a lot of in the body, feeling into the body, emotional work. That's been really powerful for me personally. It's been fascinating, actually. So one of the techniques that I teach in BBD is how to feel the physical sensations of emotion. And we can feel an emotion in the body. And then we have options about what we do. We can just be with the feeling and notice how it comes up, how it moves, how it changes, what it turns into. or we can engage with it. We can have a conversation with our emotions. We can, work with them very directly. So I actually do a lot of that kind of internal conversational work. I've spent a lot of time looking at these emotions and trying to understand where do they come from, what kinds of thoughts do they create for me, what's the origin. So I'm pretty aware of my own childhood patterns, my own like attachment wounds and all of that. And once you're aware of them, you can work with them and shift them. So I often will, if I feel anxious, I'll stop, I'll take a deep breath, I'll feel into the anxiety, I'll notice where it is, and then I'll get curious, what's the real origin of that anxiety? Am I anxious because of something that's happening now? Or is it that what's happening now is reminding me, triggering a childhood anxious part of me? And then I can often work with or comfort that internal part. So I do a lot of parts work with myself. I also do some journaling. I teach a tool in Better Beyond Divorce called the thought work model. That's been a really helpful tool for me personally in rewiring neural pathways. We could probably do a whole video, and maybe I should, on how I use this work in my own marriage. But maybe the brief answer is that working with all of you and learning, seeing men go through and try to sort out what's behind different emotions, where these thoughts originate, it's helped me have a much deeper understanding of my husband's reactions. For instance, if he's angry, that's not frightening to me anymore because I have a much deeper understanding of where anger actually comes from and what the roots of that can be for men. So in my marriage, it's much more a practice of curiosity and compassion. So whatever he's bringing to the table, instead of feeling as reactive, I'm able to stop and say, well, what is this really about for him? And start reading between those lines. So yeah, we could go down a whole rabbit hole there, but great question. Short answer is I do a lot of emotional processing with the parts work, and then the thought work journaling is helpful for me too. Okay, let's see. Sean, there's not a BBD coaching call today. Let me double check and I'll give you the next one. We have a call tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So it might be for the UK, that's going to maybe be in the wee hours the following day. So it's a bonus call, and we're actually going to focus on feeling emotions in the body. We're going to talk a lot about the inside out of that. So that's tomorrow. And then we have our Q&A call coming up on Wednesday. So those will be in the BBD community. And if you can't find them, let me know and I'll make sure you get the links to everything. John 𝐂𝐎𝐍𝐄𝐂𝐓 says, how do I get her out of my head? Yeah, this is a good question. So John, if you're still on with me, would you drop me a note in the comments? How is she in your head? Are you seeing mental images of her? Are you thinking about particular memories of her? Are you hearing her voice and the things that she says to you? How does she show up in your head? And I see you have a follow-up question here. How do I stop dreaming about her? Okay, so it's mostly dreaming about her. Like she's not in your head so much during the day, it's at night. Okay. So there's a couple of layers here, John. So this is something, John, have you watched my masterclass yet? The How to Take Back Control of Your Life After Divorce? I'm going to get you the link because this is a little bit of a longer answer than I can give you on this call. But this is going to help you. I'm going to drop the link you have seen it. Okay. And for anybody who hasn't, here's the link that I'm talking to John about. So, John, I would recommend you go back through the masterclass. And what we want to do to get her out of your head, we have to do two things. One, we have to start working with your emotions and get to the root of why she's there. What is this really about? Why does it keep coming up for you? So in that masterclass, some of those techniques for activating the medial prefrontal cortex, we have to do that first. We have to get the emotions on board. Then we can stop and we can go back and say, okay, what is this emotion really telling me? Right? So your dreams are not actually about your wife. She's representing something, right? And we need to figure out what she represents in your brain. And that's going to be tied to your own attachment cycles, perhaps to some of your past trauma and those. So depending on your background and your history and what's happening in your brain, the neural pathways that are active, those are going to determine what she's actually representing. So we need to activate the medial prefrontal cortex, and you can do that with the tools in the masterclass. And then we need to get to the root of that. I see Nancy Drew. I like your screen name here. Yes, I am a life coach. I'm a life coach and I'm an NLP practitioner. And I work specifically with men going through unwanted divorces. I have a coaching program called Better Beyond Divorce. All right, guys, I see some other questions here. Lots of comments. Guys, thank you for being so present and sharing so much of what you're going through here in the chat. Okay, guys, I just want to make sure I didn't miss any key questions here. Let's see, Paul, you had a question that I missed, and I see one from Adam too. Okay, so Paul says, wife of 38 years initiated divorce without talking to me and implemented no contact. Trying to respect it. How long should it last? Should I respect it? So Paul, first I just want to acknowledge that that's a lot, right? 38 years together, and then all of a sudden she's initiating divorce, not talking to you, no contact. So there's no clear answer on how long it will last. It really depends. Usually when people implement no contact, they're trying to do exactly what Norman was talking about earlier. They're trying to not feel so triggered. So if she's implementing no contact, it's because she is feeling triggered, right? Her nervous system is in an activated state. Right? And she's using no contact to try to make herself feel safer, feel calmer. This does not mean that you actually are in any way a danger to her. It just means that because of the cycles the two of you have been in throughout your marriage, the cycles that eventually led to her wanting to file for divorce, she's still feeling really triggered by those things. Right? So the no contact is going to last as long as she's feeling reactive. And so this is challenging because that's not something you can control. That's about her. Right? That's her nervous system state. Those are her neural pathways. Those are her triggers. So in terms of should you respect it, it really depends on what your goals are, and what you want. What I can tell you is if you don't respect it, it's likely going to be more triggering for her and more activating for her. So we can't fix this for her. We can't calm her nervous system for her. All we can do for another person's nervous system is support them in feeling safe and coming back down to a grounded state. So if you would like the divorce process to be as amicable as possible, then I would recommend trying to respect the no contact, because for a divorce to be amicable, people need to feel safe. The more that you're in fight or flight, or that she's in fight or flight, that's when it escalates into it can escalate into a nasty legal battle, into a nasty financial battle. Because when people go into fight or flight and their nervous systems are activated, they get very defensive and they get hyper focused on the problems and the negative. Right? So if she's asking for no contact, by respecting it, that's one thing you can do to support her coming into a calmer nervous system state where it is possible for you to actually communicate. What I'd encourage you to do, Paul, is respect the no contact and then focus on you. What's your nervous system doing? How are you reacting to this? How do you feel? What's coming up for you? What kind of support systems do you have? Are you seeing a therapist? Do you have friends and family? I would encourage you respect this and focus on getting yourself to a place where you feel safe and solid and grounded. If you haven't yet, that masterclass that I just dropped in the chat, if you haven't seen that yet, that would be a great next step for you. It will help you look at those questions. How is this impacting me? We can't control much about how it's impacting her. All we can do is try to respect it and give her that room for her nervous system to calm down. But there's a lot of concrete steps we can take to help you get through this in a healthy way, so that if and when there is an opportunity for communication and connection, you'll be in a healthy state for that. And especially with the length of that marriage, there's just going to be so much there for you to work through. So I would really strongly encourage you, don't do that alone. this is part of why divorce is so difficult for men, is because most men have learned that they have to do hard emotional things alone. Right? Men are taught that they need to be the rock, they need to be stoic, they need to be strong. We have all these little sayings like man up and be a man and prove you're a man. And it leads men to self-isolate when they're in pain. When you've been married for 38 years, you need support and you need people with you and you can talk to about this. So for Paul and for anybody else in a similar situation, I so strongly encourage you. I'm really glad that you're here on this call, that you're participating, you're commenting, you're sharing here. That's wonderful. Don't isolate yourself, even if that temptation is there. Let's see, Adam Noble, I see a question. How do you balance the no contact? And then she says to come and see you. Adam, or if you're still on, she says to come home. Are you initiating no contact? Did she initiate no contact? If you're still on, drop it in the chat for me. Okay, guys, I'm just scrolling down here. Oh, sorry, Paul. I see I was talking to you and I missed some of your new comments coming in. Paul says she's been working through codependency issues from her childhood over the last year. I want to support her and work on improving myself in parallel. Yeah, so Paul, part of the challenge is going to be that she's got to work through this. She's got to do that work. And it sounds like she is, which is wonderful. One of the challenges for you is going to be that you're going to want to be able to support her more than you can. And so respecting that this is her work to do is one of the most powerful ways that you can support her. And then shifting and saying, okay, I'm going to trust her to do her work on this. I'm going to give her room to do that. And I'm going to focus on, what do I need? Where are my wounds? What do I need to heal? I'm really glad that you started counseling, and I'm glad that the videos have been helpful. You're welcome, Paul, and thank you for being here today. Okay, so Adam, you said yes, she initiated no contact, and now she's saying to come home. That's a confusing and messy one, isn't it, Adam? I have to say, I can't give you too much direct advice here without more details. What I'd encourage you to start with is take a few deep breaths and check in with yourself and notice how you're feeling. How do those conflicting messages from her, what is that creating in you emotionally? And I would expect that conflicting message from her is probably not the first time that there's something like this going on for her, right? And maybe you can tell me in the chat, in the past, has she said or done contradictory things as well? Like saying one thing and then asking for another? Adam says that he's respecting the no contact that she initiated, but now the calls and texts are nonstop begging him to come home. Yeah, so Adam, there's a lot here. And one of the things that you could do, what I would suggest you do is reach out to her and ask to meet with her in a couples counseling session. So instead of you guys saying, okay, we're doing no contact and now you're going to sit down together and work through it, I would encourage you to do that in a supportive environment with that mediating presence of a therapist. Because if she's got that push and pull, right? If she's like, get away, I don't want to talk to you. Oh my God, I need you, come home. That is a very specific kind of response that's usually rooted in past trauma, right? So when I don't know your wife's history, but one thing that I would expect is that at some point in her life, perhaps in her childhood, she lived through the experience of the person that she relied on for love, for care, her caretaker, a parent, was also somebody who hurt her. Right? And this is a really horrible thing for children who suffer from abuse. The person that they need, the person they depend on, is the same person who is dangerous to them. So I need you to survive, but you're also a threat to my ability to survive. And so when a child lives through that, they have to adapt to that impossible situation. And often they do it by learning this push-pull response. Get away from me, you're dangerous. Come here, I need you, I rely on you. Right, so that if this is a pattern in your wife, that suggests that she might have some of this kind of trauma in her history, and it's playing back out now in your relationship. I don't know her story. It might be something different coming up for her, but this is a cycle, and it's there for a reason. So again, this is hers, right? This is her history. Just like Paul's wife is working on her codependency. If your wife has a trauma history, that's hers to heal. All you can do is be supportive of that. And when she sends you those mixed signals, you can start to read between the lines and say, hey, I think maybe this is really about, the fact that you want love and connection, but you're also afraid of being hurt. How are we going to work on this? See if she's willing to do couples counseling. A couples counselor could help you identify those cycles, see the way maybe that they trigger you and that you guys feed into them. But it sounds like she really should be working with a trauma therapist, and it might be very helpful for the two of you to work through couples therapy as well. There's another resource, Adam, that you might find helpful. It's called, I'm going to put it in the chat here, Hold Me Tight Online. It's an online program for couples by Dr. Susan Johnson, who's like one of the original attachment science experts. And it guides you through, I forget if it's 7 or 8, intimate conversations that you can have with your partner where you can start to unpack what's really behind all of these different confusing messages. So if she's open, it sounds like she's asking you to come home. If she's open to actually working on this with you, those are some resources you can use. Couples therapy, the Hold Me Tight Online, and perhaps some personal counseling for each of you. Sean Newman says, mine is in menopause and says she's lost feelings for everyone and everything. That is really sad, Sean. And it sounds like maybe some depression of some sort with menopause for her. Again, Sean, there's things there for her to work on if she's willing to. But I would encourage you to really prioritize taking care of yourself. When the person that you love has pain that's bigger than yours, right? I'll give you the example. I started out, when I first started coaching, I was coaching people whose partners suffered from depression and often suicidal depression. So when your partner has this big mental health crisis or this past trauma or this pain, it can often feel like anything you feel is just not as significant. And it can lead us to disregard our own emotions because we're so focused on their pain. So Sean, for you, I don't know if that's a pattern you're experiencing, but I would really encourage you to take care of yourself. Right? This is really sad what she's going through, and it is really hard for her, but it's having an impact on you as well. And that's the area where you have the most power to create healing, both for yourself and for the cycles in your marriage. So please prioritize what you're feeling and getting the support you need around that. Sean says, my wife has mentioned perimenopause as a factor too. Yeah, I mean, hormonal changes have an emotional impact. Right? Those emotions are a physical experience in the body. And now we're having these hormonal changes that shift some of those feelings. And the thing is, though, that menopause can be a factor. It's not the root cause. Right? So there's women who go through menopause and don't get divorced. There's women who go through menopause and don't lose their feeling for everything in their life. If that's happening during menopause, it's because it's tied to, there's something else that's been going on that menopause is bringing out. So there can definitely be a correlation, but it's not the root cause. So I would encourage you, and this isn't just menopause, if there's mental illness or physical health challenges, anything else that's kind of happening along with this divorce, it's a factor. But what happens with any of these disruptive life events, let's call menopause for the sake of this video a disruptive life event, because it certainly can be. When something happens and shakes us up, something changes, it decreases our resiliency and our window of tolerance. So whatever's been there before, whatever past trauma, whatever attachment wound, whatever coping mechanism, all of a sudden, we've been coping, we've been doing okay, we've been hanging in there, but we haven't actually been able to heal or resolve those wounds. We haven't broken those cycles for ourselves. So now we have this added stressor, and maybe that's a better word than a disruptive life event, that menopause is a stressor. You add this extra stressor on, and if I've just been barely coping, if like I've been dealing with insecure attachment, and I've been dealing with codependency, and I've been dealing with childhood trauma, and man, I've been coping pretty darn well, and I've held it together my whole life, and now this extra layer comes on. I get sick, I go through menopause, the kids move out. All of a sudden, it's like too much. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. My coping mechanisms aren't up to the task. And so everything starts to fall apart for me. So that's often what's happening with these other factors. And the danger is that we see the correlation and then we say that's a cause. We say, well, menopause is a cause of the divorce. No, menopause is the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It was the last thing that now her coping mechanisms weren't able to handle it anymore. And the reason it's important to look at that is not for her, it's for you. Because if it's menopause, then what do? Now you've got to find a partner who's not going to go through menopause. Like, you have so little control over the outcome of the relationship if the cause is the menopause, right? But if we can look at it and say, well, menopause was the last thing, right, that kind of blew the top off. Now we can actually go back and say, okay, well, what caused all that pressure to be there in the first place? That this marriage couldn't handle the stress of menopause. What was going on? What were the cycles we were caught up in? What were the patterns we were living out? How were we coping in our marriage instead of really communicating, instead of really connecting? And now if I can understand that, I can break those cycles. And now in my next relationship, I don't have to be scared of menopause, right? Because I know that we have the resilience, that we have the connection, the communication to handle stressors inside this relationship. That's why we always have to look under the surface and get to the root, right? Yes, menopause is a factor. Yes, medications might be a factor. All of these other things are going on. Does the relationship have the resiliency to handle those stressors? Hi, Mark. Nice to have you on. Okay, you guys, we can go in a lot of different directions. I'm afraid I do have to head out here. Thank you guys all for participating, for a great conversation. We started out talking about how your wife can act fine during the marriage, and then we talked about a whole bunch of different things. I do, for anyone who's just joining us now, please come over and chat with me on Instagram. I'm starting a brand new campaign. It's new for me to be on Instagram. It's kind of exciting. It's called the Break the Cycle campaign. And what you can do is you can DM me on Instagram at Rachael Sloan Coach. And I'm going to put it in the chat because my name is spelled a little bit differently than you might think. It's spelled like Michael. At Rachael Sloan Coach on Instagram. DM me. And my team and I are going to be going through all of those messages. You can tell me some of your story. And we're going to be sending you the next steps based on what you share. We might ask you some more questions as well, kind of get to the root of what's going on for you. And then the goal with that campaign is to give you the next step so that you can start to break these cycles for yourself and have really strong and healthy relationships going forward. And if you're not on Instagram, you can always fill out the contact form on my website as well. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's been great to be on with you. And I will see you guys on hopefully in our next YouTube video, and we'll do another live session soon as well. All right, guys, have a good night.